Good morning, everybody. Just like David, I collect alphabet soup, hence a lot of alphabets behind my name. So it's really great to see all of you this morning. I'm very impressed that you're out here at, 8 o'clock in the morning? But I have to say that I'm more impressed that I am here at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay. So we'll be spending the next hour or so talking about time to get serious about information security as opposed to just cybersecurity. And we'll touch upon one of them, why that is the case. You know, one of my mentors back then told me if I'm about to speak in front of a large live audience, just scan the room and make sure, and you can imagine that people are sitting there in their underwear, right? So may I just say that you all look very wonderful today. All right, so with that, why don't we begin? Let me just start by saying that this presentation is made available with the approval and authorization of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And so they were kind enough to allow me to use their presentation. So what is information security? We talked about, I mentioned a little earlier that it is more than just cybersecurity. So then what is it? Well, it's a systematic approach encompassing people, process, and system. When I used to be a consulting partner, on a number of jobs, one of the elements that we wanted to address was the combination that most benefits the organization in terms of people, process, and IT. Not one of those systems alone or solutions alone is going to get you where you want to go. So it's how you manage that combination. And as you can imagine, it's not a one-size-fits-all for all entities. Some entities have much stronger processes versus IT, and some organizations have a very wealth of HR. So you gotta make sure that you balance that correctly. So same in terms of how we manage information security. So we have to address the people, process, and IT system that really safeguards the critical information that protecting them from inside and outside threats. Now, the key word there is what is the critical system, or what are we trying to protect? And when I speak in the universities or when I speak in front of an audience, we want to focus to make sure that we are trying to safeguard what I call the crown jewel. So you really need to know what it is that you need to protect. Now, if you're a bank, like the bank that I'm at, customer information, clearly, credit cards, Social Security, they're very important. Healthcare organization, Social Security, medical information. So what is it that needs to be controlled? Now, we won't touch upon it, but let me make a brief statement here that these information security really should be tied in with business continuity management as well as disaster recovery. I'm sure people are familiar with those two terms. For instance, where at our bank we have our data center, and we also at the same time have a hotspot for disaster recovery purposes. Now, being a bank, we have a lot of regulations where we can host some of those hotspots. And because of the renewal of the Patriots Act, some of that information that's related to customers must be maintained within the United States. So when we outsource that capability to AT&T, other places, we have the responsibility to make sure that the vendor that we chose, who also have their own secondary hotspots, are within the 48 United States, and they're not hosted in Canada or other places. So it is, as a board member, our ultimate responsibility to make sure that we adhere to any of those regulations. So if you have systems that for one reason or another are hacked, you want to make sure that you have that capability to go to wherever those disaster recovery site is and upload a clean slate so your business is not interrupted. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are faced with information security. Now that we live in a digital age, information are moving to more and more of a digital format. And I don't think that's any surprise to anybody here. And of course, digital information knows no borders. People can access the information from the other side of the world. They can store some of that information the other side of the world. So how do you protect yourself? How do you protect that crown jewel from being exploited? So therefore, information needs to be protected in a secure environment. Therefore, the old ways where you have a data center, and I'm not trying to downgrade the importance of data centers, but data centers are in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, based upon how hardened it is. So tier 4 data center are the hardest for anybody to break into from a security perspective, as well as they have a lot of redundancies. For instance, in electricity, so if there's a power outage, that data center will not go down. So that's an example of a physical security. And of course, information security requires legal and technical expertise. The example that I mentioned earlier about the Patriot Act, that is a constraint that put upon financial services companies in terms of where you can maintain some of that information. And information security is a relative new frontier. It continues to be, we are continuously challenged by the hackers, but they all seem to be one or two steps ahead of us. What do we do? How do we protect ourselves? I don't think we are able to completely secure ourselves from hackers, but we try to do mitigation. What are the risk mitigation opportunities that each one of us needs to know? Let's take a look at these 6 boxes in front of you. And they represent the primary threats to information, not all inclusive, but some of the primary ones that we deal with. Well, obviously, one is the viruses. Whenever you are tapping into websites, you are susceptible to getting infected by viruses, and their unauthorized access. Right? And of course, their theft of information. We all heard about this in the past, I guess, election cycle. That's a good example of theft of email, and this physical destruction of data. And unintentional distribution. Now that we are able to access information from anywhere in the world, from PCs, from laptops, from my cell phones, that means convenience, but it also adds an extra dimension in terms of security that we need to be aware of. And last but not least are the internal staff. How do you train them? Remember that first slide where we had process, technology, and people? The old game, I guess, of the weakest link. In many cases, that weakest link is human. So what do? One of the things we can do is to appropriately inform them what the policies are and what are the risks related to not following those policies, and enhance that with the appropriate level of training. So, defense-in-depth strategy. Now, if you take a look at this, I mentioned earlier that what are we trying to protect? In this case, it's data. But if we put that in a context of everyday living, let's assume that you're married, you have 2 kids, you want to protect them. So that would be where that dartboard is. That's what we want to protect ourselves from the outside elements. So one of the things you might do, your wife comes back and says, guess what? Joe down the street had his house broken into. Are we safe? It's a good question. So the husband goes and says, all right, let me see what we can do. So he goes out and changes all the locks. Make sure that they're up-to-date locks. So we're going from the outside. So every door, every window has a lock. Right? That's very good defense. But then he's more concerned that certain entry points are more susceptible for break-in. So like the front door, the back door, he calls his friend, the locksmith, and the locksmith comes over, and they put in a deadbolt. And a deadbolt goes directly into the frame, so it's a lot more secure than a regular lock. So he feels comfortable. But then again, the wife goes out and she's informed that there are more break-ins. So he's concerned that, well, maybe not the deadbolt is not secure enough. So he calls up and puts in an alarm system, puts sensors on the windows and the back doors. But he figures, well, nobody's going to climb up to the second floor and then and enter there, so it's safe. Let's just fortify the first level. But he has second thoughts with a little pushing from the wife and says, what happens if something happens? So he puts in what we mentioned there as a motion sensor. So motion sensors are in different corners, and if you walk past it, it triggers an alarm, it triggers a message to a security place. The problem there is that they're already in the house, okay? So you're already breached. So one night, they're lying on bed, looking up, and he realizes that there's skylights. And he knows that skylights were not protected, and he starts counting how many skylights they have. So then he realizes that we need to put cameras in to make sure that if we are breached, we have evidence so the police can go out and protect it. So this is an example in terms of the different types of layer to protect your family. Similar things in terms of data. You want to have a whole slew of security measures. So if one is breached, there are others that you can rely upon. And the outer rim is always the physical security. So let's talk a little bit about how do we go about in securing those systems. So you can improve your information security in terms of data protection, protection against malware. What do you do when you have so many mobile devices? Bring your own device to work. Now, not everything is hard-coded or hardwired in terms of access points. Now we enjoy the convenience of wireless security. And what are some of those challenges there? And of course, the internet security issues that we will be facing. So the data protection, let's spend a little time on that. Here are examples of probably some of the gadgets that you have, right? You have the USB port, the cell phone, and you have the laptop. I know you can't see this, but this is a thumb drive. Well, let me give you a practical experience that I know has taken place. And as I said, David introduced me as a former partner at a couple of the big 8 firms or the big 4 firms. So I know what they do. The other day, and I was invited to a conference in the office of one of the big 4 accounting firms. And I'm not going to tell you who it is. So I dressed the part, I dressed like this, and I woke up to the reception area, and I said, I am here for XYZ conference. How are you doing today? And engage in a little conversation, and then she smiles and says, which office are you from? To which immediately I say, I'm from the New York office. And says, I'm going to buzz you in. Go right in. I have successfully breached that first security point. So what do? I showed you this thumb drive. Now, if I were a malicious actor, I would have viruses. I would have things in here that is harmful. So what do is, I know that big four firms, for instance, a lot of conference rooms. And so I walk around. Some of the conference rooms are taken, some of them are being prepped for the next meeting. So what do? I take one of these, I casually placed it on a conference room table. What do you think is going to happen when the next group comes in? They say, oh, it must be from the other meeting that was held before us. Oftentimes they take it, plug it in, the rest is history. And those things do happen. Another example with this is that when you go to, let's say, what we used to call like universities, Honda University campus, Toyota campus, and there's a lot of campuses here which are dedicated to one company. Or if you take a look at a building and you see a name of a company, that means that their main tenant. What do you do with this? You kind of casually drop it in a parking lot. The same thing happens. Somebody picks it up, must be one of our employees. Plug it in, the rest is history. They happen. Where is that weakest point that we talked about? It's the human factor. Now, if there was an appropriate training, when you get it, bring it to security, bring it to IT, none of this would happen. Okay? So, where is your data? It's on your cell phone, it's everywhere. That means that there's more places of entry, there's more places that you need to protect your data from. We mentioned physical securities, like keys, for example, in the house. Right? House key, secure the home, home is secured. That means that the content inside, presumably, is secured. In terms of digital security, passwords, how many of you have received emails lately that the 4-digit password is not enough? Please select 8. Not only 8, use information like special characters, a number, et cetera, et cetera. How many combinations do you think they exist if you have 1 through, 9, with a 4-digit security code? The answer is 10,000. And if you have only 10,000 combinations, it only takes 6 to 7 hours to use brutal force to go in and unlock your phone. Now, of course, you know that some organizations, some software companies, Apple, Android, etc., are now giving you another option, biometrics. And how many of you have using biometrics? Right? There are a few. Now, biometric is a good news and bad news situation. The good news is, right, it's your fingerprint. But the bad news is, if they get a hold of your fingerprint, there's not much you can do about it. Now, Japan, and I think part of Asia, tourists likes to do this, right? They take a picture, they do this. I know we used to do that here as well. The problem with that is, with the technology that's available, they can enhance the fingerprint and take a look at the fingerprint and come up with a fingerprint image maker that they can use to access your biometrics. The problem is, it's hard once you get cracked for you to go out and change your fingerprints. But Japan has come up with a solution that will come into the marketplace, I guess, in about a year or two, And that's a film that you place on your finger. So when you do this, you can take a picture, but it will not show up. And also, the second good news is that film will be able to with that access the biometrics. So you don't have to take it off and use your fingerprint. You can use it with that information on. So the good news with biometric is it's secure, but once it's breached, like everything else, it's susceptible to breach. It's a harder time. It's not like you can go and change your password. And many organizations, probably organizations that you're with, are now requiring you to encrypt that message. Encrypt your data. Anytime you access or send information, you're asked to encrypt it. Why is that? Because every privacy regulation now requires it. And if you don't do it, in certain industries, certain companies, certain size, then the company is liable. Loss of control of encrypted data does not constitute what's called breach of security. That's important from a legal perspective, right? Because by nature, the information is scrambled. So data should be encrypted when it's stored and when it's in transit. So even when you store it here, data stored should be encrypted. Okay. Now there's some encryption tools that are really simple and some are more complex. Now we'll kind of explore a little bit about the difference between those. Encryption is like a key to the lock. When you encrypt and send information, the recipient needs that key to turn it back into plain English. Now I know some of you may say, my English is bad enough. I don't need to encrypt it because they won't figure out what my message is. So maybe that is a built-in encryption for you, but it is not going to protect you or the company from any legal action. So here's an example. On the left is the unencrypted file. You can see, I know it's hard to see, but has the data name, has the megabytes, has all that information clearly readable. But the same information under encryption looks like that. It's mumbo jumbo. And so even if it falls into the wrong hands, you're protected in terms of the recipient of that information requiring a key to unlock it. If you have, and most of us have, MS Office encryption, here's some of the ways that you can use your current Word document, Excel, PowerPoint to encrypt some of that information. Just follow through in terms of how do you do that. Okay? It adds that layer of protection, might be able to sleep better at night. Now I showed you one of these thumb drive. Now these thumb drive, some of the things that you can buy fairly inexpensively or pick it up at some of these tables from the sponsors, they are not secure USB. You can get some of these that are secure, which require you to put in a key or put in a password, a combination of numbers, so you can have access to your thumb drive. So that's an added protection. In case you lose it, it's safe. And remember the discussion, the multiple layers, the more you have, the better it is. So this is great. If you have a password code, even better. So there are, of course, guidelines for protecting your data. These are guidelines. They're not absolute, and they're not foolproof. So the first one, store data when you are directed. What that means is if a company says you cannot store your data or company data on a thumb drive, that's exactly what it means. You cannot. If it tells you to secure it in a C drive, that's where it goes. Follow that protocol. Do not make unnecessary copies of sensitive data. Right? Just in case I lose it, I want to have the same data in 10 different places. Well, that means that there are 10 different places where a breach can occur. Treat data in your custody with due diligence. Protect it like you're protecting something that's important to you personally. And be mindful when disposing of data. For instance, if the data is no longer needed, don't keep it. If it is stored in your thumb drive, destroy it. Right? Don't just throw it out, because that's a wealth of information. Because thieves will go to any length. Because when I was in the audit side, I used to work for a corporate raider that used to be an audit client of ours. And they would do a lot of acquisitions. And some of you may have known the name Ron Perlman. Okay? So we worked in his office, and deal makers have a lot of sensitive information. And what is that info? Why is that important? Because some of those information are what? Insider information. So every time, before they go back, they shred everything left, right, sideways. Because what happens is the thieves pretend that they're garbage collectors. They go through and rummage and says, what are they looking at? Who are they looking at? Okay? So it is your responsibility to make sure that you dispose of those data appropriately. You encrypt those sensitive data, so even if it gets into the wrong hands, you're protected. And use secure USB. And when you no longer need it, don't throw it away. Take a hammer, smash it. Now, we talked about storing data. And as this picture can tell you, a lot is going on, right? A lot of information flows through this cloud. Some informations are what's stored in a cloud. So cloud gives us advantages, benefits, but it also means that there's additional risks that were not associated prior to the existence of clouds. Now, when we look at the cloud storage, here are some of the considerations. As I said earlier, there are benefits. One of the benefits is when it's easy to set up. They offer you, it's 1 month free, or at first 10 gigabyte storage is free. Right? Just use your create a password, create your user ID, and there you go. And as I said, they're free to users, and they're convenient storage location. You don't have to be carrying these around. And you can, what? Access it anywhere. There are individual editions, and for the corporate world, there are corporate edition. And depending on the service you sign up for, there's a mix of security configurations that are available, but at the same time, they help you back up your data. So in case you lose it, it's there. Example is like what? Google Drive, Box, other such services. And here are some examples. Box, OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive. You probably at least have heard of them. You probably use one, maybe two, or maybe all four, personally or at work. Because it has its convenience, Of course, the idea is risk mitigation. How do we go about making sure that we're not taking any unnecessary risk with the data? So you want to make sure you determine the approved system and how to communicate, right? So if you have to use or you're allowed to use cloud storage, make sure you understand the company's protocol. Use only services that encrypt in transit and in storage. Sensitive documents should be encrypted before you store it. Do not share sensitive file links unless encrypted. Now, it probably doesn't happen in your organization, but I've seen when I go out to my clients that there's a very kind of tight-knit group, or maybe accounts payable people, accounts receivable people, that try to cover for each other work-wise. So not only do they do that, they also know each other's password. Or sometimes even worse, they share one password. That is a no-no. So what happens, right? Jane is working, is one of the account receivable clerk, and then there's Pat. Now, when Pat is about to leave for a competitor, what human nature may drive Pat to do something, right? Some of these data that I have may be useful, not only what I do, what the rest of the team does. So if there is a shared password, or we know, or Pat knows the password for all of her 5 buddies, information can leave. So you're opening yourself to vulnerability in terms of the secure data. And another one is to require user logins when sharing files. Be aware who you're sharing that information is. 1, 2. See if you know where those shared data is going to be secured. It may be secure in your position, but who knows what Sally's situation is. So one of the 6 boxes from the earlier slide talked about malware. Now, malware, sometimes known as viruses, Trojans, ransomware, worms, spyware, phishing, these are all kind of grouped under one umbrella called malware. Like my bank and any other banks, other financial service institutions, government, healthcare, they are potentially more susceptible for these type of attack than some other more standard or mundane industries. For instance, as part of the audit committee, and because I have personal interest in cybersecurity and security information, I talked to our IT people, the security people. Have we been breached? Have we caught somebody trying to breach us? And if the answer is no, I get worried. Because in this day and age, it probably means, or it could mean that we just don't know it. Okay. So be sensitive. If all of your competitors are being hacked and you're not, maybe you just don't know about it. One of the things that's here or not here is DDoS, right? DDoS, distributed denial of service. Now, we all experienced this, I guess maybe 3-4 months ago. Remember when your internet wasn't working or very slow, and you turn in your radio, and they tell you that a wave of DDoS attack started in the East Coast, moved over to the DDoS is distributed denial of service. And what that means, in simple terms, is let's say you have a drink. There are some benefits of alcohol, but there are others, non-benefits. So what is the purpose of your liver, right, and kidney? To cleanse your body from harmful effect. If you have a drink, they work fine. But if you stop binge drinking, at one point or another, your organs are going to start functioning because it's too much overload. DDoS is similar to that. When using different types of software, you inundate a website with frivolous type of information requests. One or two can be handled tens and millions within a short span of time. It's going to crash the system. Now, why would they do that? What is the person? Maybe it's the college kids or high school kids. Maybe they like to see that. But oftentimes, when there's a distributed denial of service attack, that means that's a cover. It's a cover for something else. For example, when a DDoS attack occurs, the IT and security people are called, fix this, because we're not getting our internet orders. So the attention goes there. That leaves the guards are focused in one area of the prison. The other side of the prison, scarcely guarded. That's where the penetration takes place. So the DDoS, it is an issue that needs to be dealt with, but oftentimes it's a cover for something else, and you need to be aware of that. Malware, it causes a lot of headaches. It causes us a lot of problems. Well, it steals data. It deletes data. So if it steals it, or if it deletes data, if you have a good backup, DR, and you have a good business continuity planning, it should help you restore the data that was missing. And displays messages. That's a typical ransomware. When I have a ransom software infected files, you put it in, what happens? The screen turns black, and the picture of a skull with bones like this come up and says, I have taken over your computer. If you need an encryption key to unlock it, you need to pay me or pay this organization X dollars. Probably more than just X dollars. And not only that, what are they going to ask you to pay in with? Bitcoins, right? You've heard of Bitcoins. Unregulated digital currency. Why is that? It's because it's not traceable. And so it's easier for the dark side of the internet people, the hackers, to use that. Now, I don't know if you're probably aware, the Bitcoin price is now, I think, higher than the ounce of gold. It goes up and down, but it's unregulated. That's the beauty for the hackers. So when they're asking for ransom, chances are it's going to be Bitcoin or other such digital currency. What do you do if you have a corrupt data? Well, if you have a DR, disaster recovery, you can go out and go back to a state where the data was still pure and upload that information, segregate out what was corrupted. The IT people can go out and fix that, but still you have good data to continue doing your business. Now slow down the hardware, that would be similar example to DDoS, distributed denial of service, for instance. It's a good question, right? How do you get it? Well, most often you click on something that maybe you shouldn't. You open a file that you shouldn't. You install software that you shouldn't. And you open emails because you think it's from a trusted source. I sent you an email. Here is the link to my presentation. Now, some of you will probably just click it and put it into garbage, right? But some of you may want to click it. Now, if my email was spoofed, meaning I wasn't the one that sent that email, you are susceptible for malware. Social re-engineering. It's not only a millennial term. It is real. It is what the hackers use. Maybe a number of you have Facebook, Twitter, right? What else? All these different social media accounts. And you plaster your information. Right? One of the things you might do is, I'm on vacation and I'm 6,000 miles away. That's an invitation for somebody to come in and rob you because you're not there. Social reengineering. Information that are there. Typically when you have 20 passwords, the worst thing you can do is to have one password. But remember, you set up a password and they would ask you, what is your mother's maiden name? Where did you go to high school? If you put, I went to University High School. People who are going to surveil you to crack into it will go through those Facebook, all these accounts, social media, and they'll figure it out where you went. So what do? My recommendation is you put in a high school of your arch rival or something else. Don't put your own high school because it'll take them that much more time to figure it out. Okay. Browser can be hijacked. I briefly touched upon the last slide. So social engineering malware. See, attackers are turning to social engineering to bypass antivirus software. Why is that? They are now hacking people. It's easier to hack people than hack technology. For a similar reason I explained to you in an earlier example where information to certain those key questions are right there in your Facebook accounts. Increased level of deceptions are there, create ways to get user credentials. Like somebody may, and I've heard this happen, you get an email from LinkedIn or Facebook pretending you're the husband of one of your high school friends or wife. They know a little bit about you because they did social reengineering. They went and figured out what was going on in your high school days. And if you kind of recognize that name, nostalgia sets in. Oh yeah, I remember. We had a good time. I wonder what he's doing. I wonder what she's doing. Click. In the business setting, though, you might get a voicemail. Says, this is your criminal attorney. You probably received this. I receive it all the time. You have been, a lawsuit has been filed to you. Call this number. IRS is assessing back taxes. Well, of course, we all know IRS does not call you and leave you a voicemail. It's not their mode of communication. So look at it. What's happening now is you get a voicemail or somebody on the other line asking you questions. Did you like this, this, and this? And if you say yes, what are they doing on the other end? They're capturing your voice. Yes. So when they can go and hack some of that information, do you want to change your password? Click yes. So if you get a call that's requiring you to respond to those questions, like yes questions, and you don't know anything about it, hang up. Now, emails is another way. You get an email that looks like it came from your president, your controller, whoever else that you work with. Sounds good. You click on it, and what happens? You're infected. Like this would be an example. American Express, new card security guarding procedures. You get in an email. It has what? The American Express logo, looks nice, looks official. And you take your mouse and you're ready to click on it when you realize you don't have an American Express credit card, right? But if you do, you may click on it. Just be careful. And we'll show you some of the things to look at that window address, right? That gives you a hint whether potentially it's legitimate or not. Here are other examples on email. We suspect an unauthorized transaction on your account. Click here to log in. Some people fall for it. Your family member is stranded in Nigeria, send money. Maybe less people will fall for that one. You have a payment of $500 waiting in your PayPal account. Click here to claim until you realize you don't have a PayPal account. So how do you avoid it? Well, you can't eliminate it. You can try to protect yourself as much as possible. So what do? Use antivirus, browsing protection, firewall. Make sure your Windows updated. If you have XP, they're not supported, as you know, so it's very vulnerable. But even if you have the later versions, make sure, please, that you are updated, because they're updated for the latest viruses that are out there. I mentioned earlier about passwords, so you got to make sure that you don't use something similar. Phrases are good. Open space is good. I love coffee with open spaces. It's harder for them than having some word that is 8 characters long without any spaces. So be creative. Here's a good password. You want to change it every 90 days. They're unique, minimum 8 characters. You want to use cap, numbers, random metric. Use words that are not in a dictionary. And don't write it down. I think my time is up. I thank you very much for listening to me. I will be here in case you have some questions during the break. I'll be hanging around somewhere. So catch me if you can, okay?